When I saw that red muzzle poking out of the snowdrift, my heart stopped, because I realized she was looking not like a wild animal, but like a person. I had been trudging through knee-deep drifts all morning, my breath freezing in the air, every branch weighed down by the recent blizzard. I'm a forest ranger, 60 years old, and I've lived alone in that creaking cabin for more than a decade. I know every footstep, every snapping twig in these woods, yet nothing prepared me for that silent pause. I spotted her when I rounded the fallen pine, her body half buried and shivering. At first, I thought she was dead. But then I saw her trembling leg, caught fast in a rusty old steel trap, the skin broken and blood seeping into the pristine white. Ordinarily, I would have finished her quickly, to end the suffering, but something stopped me. She lifted her head and met my gaze. No snarling, no desperate snaps of her jaws. Just two dark eyes, glistening with pain and something deeper, recognition, maybe compassion. I knelt, every muscle screaming from the cold, and whispered, "I'm sorry, friend," even though I didn't know what real friends felt like anymore. I pulled my leather gloves off with jerking fingers and pried the trap open, ignoring the cut on my palm. She lay still, but I felt her lean into my touch as I freed her paw. There was no struggle, only that soft trust dangling in the heavy air. I tore strips from my own coat, wrapped her wound, and stuffed a chunk of cured pork fat into her numb mouth. She ate it, slow and deliberate, as if tasting both mercy and memory. Then she rose, wobbly but determined. I half expected her to bolt into the forest, to vanish like a phantom, leaving me alone with guilt and questions. But she paused about 10 paces away, turned her head slightly, and looked back. Her eyes bore into mine, I could almost feel her pulse. As though she was saying thank you, or perhaps promising something I couldn't yet understand. I thought that was the end. When spring thawed the last of the snow, I thought that terrible winter was finally behind me. Ice melted from the creek. Buds unfurled on the birch. My aching joints felt lighter, and with them, my mind. The red fox, her image, slipped into memory like a dream unraveling at dawn. My twins arrived soon after, Lily and Sam, 6 years old, wild with laughter and muddy boots. I greeted them at the cabin door, their small hands reaching for mine. I hadn't seen their bright faces since Christmas, and for the first time in months, I felt something like hope bloom in my chest. We spent that first week in a whirl of simple joys. I showed them how to build a lean-to from fallen branches. We layered pine boughs for a floor and dragged scraps of tarp across the roof. Their eyes shone as they tucked in straw and dry leaves, chattering about secret forts and hidden treasure. Every evening, I fried pancakes on the old cast-iron skillet, thick, buttery, dotted with wild berries we found on the trail. We ate them dripping with syrup under a canopy of budding maples, our laughter echoing through the pale green woods. During the day, I taught them to track small animals. I showed Lily how to follow deer tracks, heel pad, 3 toes. Sam learned the difference between squirrel and rabbit prints. They crouched low, their faces inches from the dirt, breath coming in excited puffs. I was proud to see their confidence grow with every step. Then, one afternoon, I caught a flash of orange at the edge of the clearing. A fleeting silhouette, so quick I wondered if it was a trick of light through the leaves. I stopped mid-scoop, pancake in hand, and squinted. The world fell silent except for the drip of melting water and the twins' delighted chatter. "Grandpa," Lily whispered, "look over there." She pointed. There, at the far end of our makeshift playground, a slender shape crouched beneath a young pine. Its coat was the same burnished red I'd seen that winter. For a heartbeat, it stared at us with eyes too steady to be normal. Then it vanished into the green shadows. My heart skipped. Rabies could make any animal fearless, even aggressive. I stepped forward, pancake forgotten, scanning the tree line. "Stay close," I ordered, my voice tighter than I intended. The twins obeyed, puzzled by the change in my tone. She's just looking," Sam said, tilting his head. "She's not running away." I swallowed, trying to steady myself. It made no sense. Wild creatures usually fled at our scent. Yet this one, she lingered. I forced a laugh. Probably just a hungry fox. But even as I said it, I doubted the explanation. That night, I lay awake listening to the forest hum back to life. Somewhere beyond the window, an owl called once, and frogs began their chorus. I stared at the ceiling, thinking of that gaze. Instead of malice or fear, there was something almost knowing. I shook my head. I was letting the past creep back in, infect my peace. The next morning, I checked the areas where I'd seen her shadow. No trap, nothing. Just broken branches and tracks half erased by fallen petals. I made coffee stronger than usual and forced down 2 pancakes before bundling the kids into their boots. We needed to forget about foxes. But as we walked the trail I'd cleared, I caught sight of those tracks again, 4 tiny ovals, then a larger pad, repeating in a steady line. They led toward the deeper forest, as if inviting us in. I knelt to inspect them, tracing the shape with my finger. "What do you think?" I asked Lily. She shrugged, eyes bright. "She's curious, Grandpa. Like you taught me." I smiled, heart twisting. I had taught her to read these signs, and now those signs were pointing toward danger. My pulse quickened. What if the fox circled back tonight? What if hunger or something darker drove her to close the distance between us? I forced myself to stand. "Let's head home," I said. My voice sounded hollow, even to me. The twins looked disappointed, but they followed without question. That evening, the forest whispered around my cabin. I checked the door latch twice. I propped an extra log beside the wood stove, just in case. Sleep came in fits. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw that flash of red and those unblinking eyes. I didn't give it much thought. I wish I had. When I led Lily and Sam into the woods that morning, sun dappled our path through fresh green leaves and the promise of morels waiting beneath the oaks. I told them to stay close, but after a while I glanced back and realized they'd scampered ahead, their laughter fading into the quiet of the forest. I called, "Easy now," and they waved, sprinting a few paces down the trail as if racing invisible rivals. I paused by a mossy stump to point out the telltale brown caps of the mushrooms peeking through the ferns. By the time I looked up, they were gone. The trail ahead lay empty, the foot-worn path swallowed by shadows and new undergrowth. My throat tightened. "Lily? Sam?" My voice trembled, cracking like old bark. Silence answered. I stepped forward, heart thundering, scanning between trunks as the sun shifted overhead. No bright jackets, no quick footsteps. I called again, louder, "Lily. Sam." The forest's only reply was the distant drip of sap and a lone jay's harsh cry. Panic bloomed in my chest. I ran back along the trail, calling out, my boots thudding on soft earth. The morels were forgotten. I searched every hollow log, every stand of ferns. My pulse hammered in my ears until it drowned out the world. By midday, I realized they were truly missing. I fished my phone from my coat. Odd, how unfriendly its screen felt against my cold fingers, and dialed for help. The voice on the other end promised firefighters, search and rescue teams would be there soon. I hung up and sank to a fallen log, head in my hands, tasting the acrid bitterness of dread. As the afternoon waned, helicopters droned overhead. Flashlights danced through the trees. I trudged beside rescuers, offering what little clues I had. Tracks, a pair of small footprints beside mine, ended abruptly at a damp patch of moss. Then nothing. My own footprints trailed onward, but the twins' prints vanished as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Night fell with a sudden hush. We spread out with our beams, white arcs cutting through the black. I stayed near the center, calling their names until my voice echoed unrecognizable. My legs shook, exhaustion pooling in my bones. I could feel the weight of every second that slipped away. Somewhere ahead, a light winked, a flashlight bobbing through the trees. I sprinted toward it, breath ragged. 2 figures emerged, rescuers, not my children. Disappointment crashed into me, rawer than fear. Alongside them, the woods breathed. Each exhale of wind sounded like a warning. And then, for a moment, I thought I saw them, Lily's braid of golden hair catching the beam, Sam's small frame crouched by a fern. But when I lunged, there was nothing but empty air and drifting leaves. My heart sank so low it felt like it might stop. I sank to my knees, fists gripping soil, eyes stinging. It felt as if the forest itself held its breath. Every crack of a twig, every distant call of an unseen bird prickled my nerves. I swear, I could feel the ground pulsing, alive with tension and unspoken secrets. In that charged silence, I sensed a presence, another pair of eyes watching me. Not human eyes, though. Something wild. I turned, expecting to see a deer or maybe a fox. But nothing moved, just the hush of pines and the cold stare of midnight shadows. My chest tightened until it felt like stone. "Where are you?" I whispered, voice broken. I had kept them in my sight for only a moment. I should never have let them go ahead, even for a second. As the rescuers called me back to the clearing, I stumbled, head spinning. They urged me forward, but I just stood there, stunned. I thought this was the end, I muttered to myself, voice hollow, as if admitting it might have been the truth. When dawn broke, the sky was still leaden and low, but a fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, so fine it sifted like flour from the heavens. I stepped outside, boots crunching the powder, and for a moment I tasted hope. The twins would be safe, found at first light. I followed the path back into the woods, calling Lily and Sam's names, my breath curling in the cold air. That's when I saw them, 2 tiny boot prints, perfectly formed in the virgin snow. My heart lurched, those were the twins. I exhaled, relief warming me, until I looked closer. Beside each child's print was another set, delicate, paw-shaped imprints, 4 toes and a slanted pad, fox tracks. They ran side by side, shoulder to shoulder, as if an unseen guide had accompanied my grandchildren through the white silence. My throat closed. In all my years as a ranger, I had never seen anything like it. Predators stalk, prey flees, but here was proof that something had walked with them, step for step, into the deeper forest. Logic shattered around me. My pulse pounded so hard I thought the ground itself would tremble. I bent low, tracing the outline of the fox print with a gloved fingertip. Around us, the world was impossibly still, the trees bowed under the snow, and the only sound was the whisper of my ragged breathing. I swallowed, tasting cold fear. Despite every instinct screaming for caution, I pressed on, following the twin pairs of tracks deeper beneath the pines. The fox prints never led or followed, they mirrored the children's every footfall, turning when they turned, pausing when they paused. It was as though the animal had walked in solidarity, an escort through dangers I could barely imagine. Twice I halted, convinced I must be imagining it. But the grooves in the snow were too sharp, too deliberate. I knelt again to inspect a print, long, slender toes, claws retracted, a silent, thoughtful footprint. My breath misted as I studied it. How could a wild creature choose to walk with us, protect us, when its very nature was survival at cost to others? Minutes stretched into an eternity as I followed those tracks until they splintered at the edge of a dense thicket. There, the children's prints veered left, toward an old fallen spruce, but the fox prints, and there were more than one set now, as if others had joined, swung around the trunk, forming a protective arc. My chest tightened so fiercely it felt like ice. Every nerve in my body screamed that this was impossible. Yet there they were, in living proof under my gaze. I stood, snow crunching under my boots, and peered through the branches, expecting to see a vixen watching me, or perhaps Lily and Sam huddled together. But all I saw was swirling white. Somewhere ahead, the tracks continued, deeper still, into a part of the forest I had avoided since the winter began, dark hollows and ice-crusted hollows where even deer hesitated. And yet, the footprints beckoned me onward, as though they held the promise of finding my children safe and sound. I swallowed past the knot in my throat and took another step. My mind raced with questions. Why would a fox do this? Why now, and why for my grandchildren? Was it the same vixen I'd freed from the trap in the blizzard? Had she come back to repay a debt I scarcely understood? The forest around me seemed to lean in, branches scratching at the sky, and I felt that ancient, wild intelligence watching, judging, guiding. My heart thundered so loudly I thought it might burst. The children's prints and the fox's intertwined led me forward, and with every step, disbelief gnawed at me. I could not fathom how any creature of fang and claw could show such compassion. And yet, here it was, traced in snow as clear as any promise. I took a shaky breath, squared my shoulders, and plunged into the thicket, determined to follow those impossible tracks to whatever lay beyond. I didn't understand how such a thing could be possible. When the sun rode high in the sky and the chill of morning had long since faded, I finally spotted the clearing. An ancient spruce lay uprooted, its roots twisting into the air like the fingers of some buried giant. Beneath the tangle of branches, I saw the shape of a makeshift shelter, a crude hut of dry sticks and woven twigs, draped with moss and littered with soft hay. My heart thundered so loud I thought the earth might tremble. I sprinted forward, branches scraping my coat, breath burning in my lungs. Through a narrow gap in the wall, I peered inside, and froze. There they were, Lily and Sam, curled up together on the bed of golden straw. Their cheeks were flushed with warmth, their small bodies covered in a patchwork of moss and pine needles. They slept soundly, chests rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Around them, the faint scent of wildflowers and wood smoke clung to the air. I stumbled into the shelter, dropping to my knees. "Lily, Sam," I whispered, voice cracking. They stirred, blinking up at me with sleepy, bright eyes. "Grandpa." Lily sat up, brushing damp hair from her face. "We're okay. The fox brought us here. She covered us." Sam nodded, too calm for a child who had gone missing in the woods for half a day. "She licked our hands, then built this. She stayed until we slept." My throat tightened so fiercely it felt as though someone had gripped it with iron fingers. I reached out, gently touching Sam's shoulder. His skin was warm, alive, and in his gaze I saw no hint of the terror I had felt. In their voices, there was no fear. Only trust. I scrambled outside to the tree's uprooted root ball, heart pounding. There, pressed into the damp earth, were their boot prints, and alongside each one, the fox's delicate tracks. I bent to examine the shelter's roof, tiny, bristly red hairs caught in the bark, glowing bright against the pale wood. My mind reeled. After everything I'd thought I knew about wild animals, about instincts and self-preservation, here was proof that a creature of fong and fur had chosen to protect my grandchildren. The same vixen I had rescued from that trap last winter had come back, guiding them through the forest's hazards and fashioning a haven beneath the fallen tree. Tears pricked my eyes as I knelt beside the tracks. Each paw print was so precise, no hesitation in their pattern, no stray claw marks, only purpose. She had walked with them, step for step, leading them to safety. I thought, this is it. This impossible kindness must be the end. I must have been granted mercy twice, once when I freed her from iron jaws, and now when she shielded my children from harm. I crouched by the shelter's entrance, wiping snow off a tuft of moss. My breath came ragged. I imagined the fox's silhouette, slender against the sky, her tail curled around her feet as she watched over them. I wanted to believe that that was all, I murmured to myself, voice thick with wonder. But the forest had more to say. When I left the children safely in the cabin, clutching Sam's jacket as he rubbed sleep from his eyes, I felt as though I were moving through a dream. The forest seemed unnaturally still, every branch and blade of grass frozen in suspense. I told myself I needed to see her one more time, not out of curiosity, but out of gratitude, and perhaps to still the tremor in my bones. I followed the old logging road, now little more than 2 ruts carved into moss and leaf litter. The late afternoon sun filtered through the budding canopy, casting golden lattices across my path. With every step, my mind replayed the morning's miracle, how she had guided Lily and Sam to that hollow shelter, how she had tended to them as though they were her own. Then, on a gentle rise ahead, I saw her. She stood motionless atop a moss-covered knoll, backlit by shafts of light that made her coat glow like embers. She did not flee. She did not shrink into the shadows. She simply watched me, poised as though she had been waiting. My breath caught, and I realized I had stopped walking. My boots pressed into the soft earth, unmoving. All at once, the air felt too wide, the world too vast. I took a cautious step forward, and in response, she turned her head, a graceful arc, and fixed her gaze on me. Her ears pricked, alert, and I felt that ancient bond hum between us, a thread woven through fate and memory. I rushed the last few paces until we were less than a dozen strides apart. She made no move to escape. Instead, she stepped closer, narrowing the space between us to barely a body's length. My heart hammered so mercilessly that I thought the sound would shatter the quiet. I swallowed past the lump in my throat and watched as she settled onto her haunches in the soft moss, every muscle relaxed yet impossibly alert. She sat there, eyes locked on mine, and for a long moment, neither of us stirred. The forest held its breath, too, the birds silent, the wind stilled. I peered into her eyes and felt the world flip upside down. There was no wild ferocity there, no hungry cunning or savage instinct. There was only something deeper, something startlingly human, compassion, gratitude, perhaps even recognition. I sank to one knee, my gloved hand hovering over my heart. My voice came out in a hoarse whisper, "Was that you?" The words felt inadequate, as though language itself could never capture the magnitude of what I'd witnessed. Her eyes did not blink. Then, almost imperceptibly, her head tipped in a slow, deliberate nod. Or maybe I imagined it. Perhaps it was my own longing shaping the motion. Yet in that instant, I believed with every fiber of my being that she was telling me, yes. It was me, the one you saved. Then, as silently as she had arrived, she rose and backed away a step. She turned and melted into the underbrush, her tail the last trace of flame against the green gloom. I remained on my knees, watching until she vanished completely, until only the hush of the forest filled the space between the trees. I stayed there for a long while, unmoving, as if rooted to the spot. My pulse finally slowed, but a tremor lingered in my limbs. I placed a hand on the moss where she had sat, a gentle, living carpet, and felt its cool dampness against my palm. I whispered to the empty woods, "I've never seen eyes like that on a wild creature. Only on people." No answer came but the distant call of a jay and the soft creak of growing branches. I rose unsteadily, uncertain whether I had truly seen what I knew I had. I carried that image of her gaze with me down the trail, burnished, knowing, impossibly wise. I walked back to the cabin as dusk settled, shadows twisting between the trees. I passed the spot where Lily and Sam had first disappeared, and my throat tightened again at the memory of their frightened cries. But that fear was already eclipsed by something larger: wonder, reverence, and a question that would haunt me. I could not tell a soul what had happened. Who would believe that a fox looked at me as an equal? That she repaid a man's mercy with her own? I pressed my hand to the pocket where I kept the tuft of red fur I'd found in episode 5, tracing its fine strands. I knew what I had to do: keep the secret safe, tucked away like a treasure in my heart. I never spoke of it again. Yet every now and then, when the wind shifts just so and the moonlight filters through the pines, I swear I see her silhouette on that knoll, watching. And I remember that impossible nod, an affirmation from the wild that even the smallest act of kindness can echo through a lifetime. I was thumbing through the leather-bound journal that night, tracing my finger over the faded Polaroids from that terrible winter day. There I was, kneeling in the snow beside her, my gloved hand still poised over the trap. Behind me, half hidden in the blurry background, I could swear I saw a flash of red fur. I paused, heart hammering, and zoomed in on the photograph. Sure enough, in the corner of the frame, a pair of dark eyes gleamed against the white drifts. I leaned back in my chair, the old cabin creaking around me, and let the memory wash over me. The fire crackled in the stove, and outside, my old hound Rufus stirred in his bed by the door. I listened as the wind rattled the shutters, thinking I'd finally put the day to rest. But then, the dogs began to bark, a wild, frantic chorus that shattered the quiet. Rufus bolted upright, hackles raised, and lunged for the door. I dropped the journal and dashed outside, boots slapping the wooden steps. There, in the moonlit yard, I saw her again. The vixen stood just beyond the fence, her red coat luminous under the lantern light. Rufus charged at her, snarling, fangs bared, driven by instinct. I called his name, but he wouldn't listen. He was a protector, and she was an intruder in his domain. I wrenched Rufus back by the collar, heart in my throat. The dog snarled and snapped at the air, trying to break free. For a moment, the fox held her ground, her posture neither aggressive nor fearful, just calm, resolute. When I finally hauled Rufus away, she melted into the shadows, and the barking ceased as abruptly as it had begun. I stood panting in the yard, Rufus trembling at my side, and the world felt unnaturally still. A sickening thought stabbed me: what if everything had happened differently? What if I hadn't hesitated over that trap last winter? What if I'd done what I thought was right, ended her suffering, and never spared her a second thought? My reflection in the cabin window showed an old man haunted by guilt. I pressed my hand against the glass, feeling the tremor in my fingers. In that moment, I realized that the fox's return was no accident of fate or curiosity, it was a debt repaid. She hadn't come for revenge, she had come to save. She had come again. A rush of warmth spread through me as I looked up at the dark sky. The snow began to fall in gentle flakes, each one dissolving on my coat. Somehow, in that instant, the forest felt forgiving. I knelt and stroked Rufus's head, murmuring, "She's not your enemy." I straightened and scanned the edge of the yard, but she was gone, vanished like a wisp of smoke. I leaned against the fence, the cold wood grounding me, and whispered into the night, "Thank you." For a long moment, I thought that was the end, my debt to nature repaid, my children safe, my conscience eased. But the forest does not speak in final words. When late autumn's chill first bit the air, I felt a pull I could no longer ignore. The maples had shed their leaves, and frost glazed the porch boards like fragile glass. I stepped outside at dawn, heart heavy with gratitude and awe, and there, on the gentle rise beyond the clearing, she waited. But she was no longer the bright russet vixen I had known. Her muzzle was flecked with silver, her coat muted by time and countless seasons. At her side stood two lithe, curious kits, their fur still touched by the fire of youth. They watched me with unblinking eyes, as if acknowledging a debt they did not owe. For a heartbeat, I held my breath. Then I bowed my head deeply, the crisp air pricking my cheeks. In that silent gesture, our worlds met, hunter turned guardian, wild turned family. The kits stepped closer, their small paws nudging against their mother's side, but she remained statuesque, regal, as though presiding over a ceremony I could barely comprehend. I felt the weight of her purpose in every line of her worn frame. She had repaid a kindness not with violence or fear, but with life and loyalty. She had shown me her world, and welcomed me into it. And then, as the sun broke through the clouds, she rose. With one last glance, she dipped her head in a motion so deliberate it stole my breath. It was a farewell bow. Like a person who says, "I remember." When I looked up again, they were gone, mere shadows among the trees, leaving only footprints and an echo of wonder in the clearing. I stepped inside the cabin and paused at the threshold. The cedar door creaked behind me, shutting out the crisp autumn air, and for a moment the only sound was the crackle of the wood stove. Lily and Sam were sprawled on the braided rug before the hearth, their laughter drifting like smoke rings through the low-ceilinged room. They were building tiny forts out of scrap wood and pine cones, pretending they were explorers charting unknown lands. My boots thudded softly on the floorboards as I crossed the room. I hadn't realized how hollow the silence felt until their voices filled the space. The twins didn't notice me at first, so absorbed were they in their game. Then Lily looked up, her eyes bright as autumn skies, and called, "Grandpa, look." Sam piped in, "We made a castle." I smiled, but my heart felt too large for my chest. Every log's crack and every pop from the stove sounded like an echo of that forest miracle. Outside, the world could still be wild and indifferent. Inside, these two children were safe. I sank onto the edge of the worn armchair and watched them. Their cheeks were rosy from the day's play. Sam scraped splinters from a pine cone. Lily lined up miniature acorn caps around a stick wall. I remembered half a day ago, wandering through drifts of snow and branches, my soul plummeting with fear. And now, here they were, as alive and laughing as any two children on earth. A warmth spread through me, as if the cabin itself recognized the wonder. I closed my eyes and felt the same hush I'd felt beneath that upturned tree when I first found them. The hush that had become a promise. I opened my eyes and whispered to the empty room. That doesn't happen. That can't happen. But I saw it. I stood before a wild creature, and it was kinder than many people. My voice trembled on the last words, and for a heartbeat I thought the walls would lean in to catch my confession. I rose and moved closer to the stove, feeling its heat on my face. The children paused and watched me curiously, sensing something important had passed between us. The wood popped again, and I drew in a ragged breath. I glanced at the photograph above the mantel, a snapshot of frostbitten trees and that trap I'd pried open. In the corner of the frame, almost hidden, lay her soft muzzle against my snow-caked glove. I ran a finger over the cracked glass. In every season that had turned since then, I'd questioned my own memory. Now I knew. My gaze drifted back to Lily and Sam. I cleared my throat. You know, I said gently, sometimes the forest speaks in ways we can't explain. They looked up, exchanging a glance. Sam shrugged and asked, like magic? Lily nodded seriously, like real magic. I chuckled, something raw and relieved bubbling in my chest. Yes. Like real magic. I crossed to the door and pulled it open an inch. A breeze slipped in, curling around their little forts. I closed my eyes and let it brush my face, hearing again the whistle of wind through pine and the soft padding of tiny paws in snow. I turned back to the children and let the moment swell. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here they tell the truth. Their eyes widened at the odd words, and I laughed, remembering the instruction that had fallen into my mind as naturally as leaves in fall. I knelt beside them and ruffled their hair. They giggled, and I felt tears prick at my lids. "Grandpa, you're silly," Lily said. Sam giggled too, and for a moment I forgot what it was like to doubt. But I couldn't hold on to the magic forever, not in words or laughter alone. Something in me demanded a final offering, a way to share the wonder without unraveling its mystery. I stood and walked to the hearth, gathering a handful of burning ember. I laid them on a flat stone near the fire, no flame beyond the stove, just warm glow, and whispered one last summons. If you also believe in a special bond with animals, right, we are not alone in this world. I let the ember die to ash, and the room settled back into its quiet comfort. Lily and Sam returned to their fort, stacking pine cones with newfound seriousness, as if they understood the gravity of my odd little ritual. I watched them for a moment longer, soaking in their trust, their unguarded joy. Outside, the sky was a pale wash of gold through frosted windows. The world beyond the cabin still held shadows and hidden depths, but inside, in that small circle of warmth and laughter, everything that truly mattered was plain as day. I raked wood into the stove and closed the door behind me, sealing in the echoes of their voices. I rose early the next morning and found fresh fox tracks in the frost by the porch steps, single, clear prints leading into the woods, as if an old friend had come to say goodbye. I followed them a few paces, but they vanished under a blanket of fallen leaves. I turned and walked back to the cabin, the windows glowing behind me. In that soft light, I felt no fear, only a quiet expectation. Perhaps one day she would return. Perhaps she already had, in footprints no man could forge and in moments no eye could see. For now, I stood at the threshold of the world I knew and the world I had been shown, a world where kindness is its own language and where the wild can be, if only we believe, the kindest of all. When I first saw him standing right in the middle of the road, my breath caught, because I realized, he wasn't there by accident. I'd driven this old logging track 1,000 times as a forest ranger, heading to my father's abandoned cabin, and never once had I expected to meet anything more dangerous than a loose tire or a fallen branch. But there he was, a massive grizzly, his shaggy coat illuminated by the late afternoon sun, unmoving, watching me with an intensity that felt impossible. I stopped the engine and sat frozen, the old Land Cruiser's rumble fading into a sudden, eerie stillness. He didn't growl. He didn't charge. He simply stood, four powerful paws planted firmly on the dusty gravel, his dark eyes locked on mine. At first I thought maybe he was wounded, or perhaps he'd smelled fresh food in my cooler and was waiting for me to step out. I eased the door open, heart pounding like a drum, and the screech of metal against dried leaves sounded alarmingly loud. He didn't flinch. Not an inch. Even as I climbed out, every muscle in my body screaming to bolt back inside, he stayed where he was. I took a cautious step forward, a shaky hand reaching for the camera slung around my neck, proof, I told myself, that I'd seen this with my own eyes. But the second I fixed my lens on him, he simply shifted his massive head, and I lowered the camera, breath catching again. It felt as if I'd pointed a rifle at him and he was daring me to pull the trigger. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I glanced back at the cabin in the distance, old pine logs darkening in the shade, but I couldn't tear my eyes from him. He stood motionless, wind ruffling his fur, oblivious to the insects buzzing around his ears. A sudden flash of memory hit me. As a boy, I'd watched my father track a bear that had raided our hives, and I'd sworn then I'd never let myself feel fear again. Yet here I was, paralyzed by the enormity of this beast. I told myself he was just a wild animal, hungry or curious, and that he'd move on as soon as I made the slightest noise. I exhaled slowly and kicked a pebble down the road, expecting him to lumber off into the trees. But he didn't. The pebble skittered to a stop at his paws, and he tilted his head, almost as if he were amused. For a moment, my mind spun. Did he understand me? Did he know I was here for my father's cabin, to claim the land he'd loved? I whispered under my breath, "Go on, move." My voice cracked like dry wood. The bear inhaled deeply, nostrils flaring, and I thought he might charge. I swallowed. Instead, he exhaled slowly, and the only sound between us was the distant rush of a creek and the soft rustle of leaves. The sun dipped lower, and shadows crept across the road, but he remained, unwavering. I leaned against the hood, legs trembling, and tried to steady my racing heart. This was impossible. No creature in its right mind would stand its ground when a man with a camera and bottled water approached. Yet he stayed. My rational mind fought panic. He must be sick. He must be protecting something. I looked down the road behind me, then at the forest on either side, but saw nothing, no cubs, no kill, no sign of distress. Only that bear, watching, waiting. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple. My father's cabin sat another mile ahead, a place I hadn't set foot in since his funeral. I needed to get there before dark, to claim what remained of his memory. I rubbed my eyes, grip tightening on my camera strap. Maybe if I climbed back in and reversed slowly, I could sneak past him. My pulse thundered as I opened the door again. But before I could move, he shifted. Not toward me, but to the edge of the road, and he sat down, carefully, deliberately, directly in my path. I froze. He looked at me as if, waiting. In that instant, a chill went through me. This was no simple impediment on a lonely road. It felt like a summons. I swallowed hard, realizing I'd already lingered too long to back away now. I closed my eyes, inhaled the pine-scented air, and met his gaze once more. His dark eyes held something ancient, an understanding that no human voice could express. I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, as though he remembered me from decades past or knew my name. My chest tightened, tears pricking the back of my eyes. I took one more step forward, and he didn't move. Instead, he let out a soft exhale, gentle as the wind, and shifted his weight, as if to say, come. I pressed my hand against the cold metal of the door, heart pounding in my throat, and whispered, "Why are you here?" No answer came, just the bear's steady gaze and the soft afternoon light dancing on his fur. I realized then that this encounter was no accident. He was waiting for me, waiting for something I didn't yet understand, but would soon discover in the heart of the forest. When I finally ripped my gaze away from that silent sentinel, a flash of memory struck me. Years ago, I'd watched a mother bear and her cub from a safe distance, my father at my side, pointing out how the cub's eyes mirrored the world in wonder. There had been something in that young cub's stare, an intelligence, a tenderness I'd never forget. And now, looking into this bear's dark, steady eyes, I recognized that same spark of familiarity. I slid back into the driver's seat, hands shaking, and gingerly started the engine. The rumble seemed deafening in the hush of the taiga. I glanced at the bear through my windshield. He lifted his massive head and, for a heartbeat, I thought he'd charge, but instead he moved only a few paces to the left, clearing just enough space for me to ease past. My stomach knotted. Was he giving me room, or testing me? I inched forward, tires crunching over the gravel, and felt my footsteps seize when he sat down squarely in the middle of the road. His enormous frame settled on his haunches like a king on his throne. My heart pounded so loud I swore he must hear it. I shut off the engine again and pressed my back against the seat, as if I could disappear into leather. "This can't last forever," I muttered, voice hoarse. "You're not going to sit here all afternoon." I grabbed my water bottle and a trail snack, an old granola bar, and stepped out, determined to lure him away. I crunched across the gravel, calling softly, "Hey there, big guy." My words sounded absurd under the forest canopy. He rose, slow and deliberate, and began to walk into the pines. Relief surged through me. He's leaving, I thought. He's going home. I followed at a respectful distance, every nerve on edge. After 20 meters, he halted and glanced directly back at me. The look froze me in place, not curiosity, not hunger, but an invitation, almost a command. He took 5 more silent strides and stopped again. Each time, I wondered if I should turn back, climb into the safety of my truck, and forget this madness. But something pulled me forward, an invisible thread from his eyes to my heart. I took another step, breath shallow. More 20 meters, more halt. He lifted a paw and tapped the soft earth once, twice, then stared again. My pulse hammered, and I realized I was following him not out of bravery, but because I felt compelled, as if I were answering an unspoken summons. The forest around us was alive with low humming, the distant rush of a stream, the whisper of needles in the breeze, the rustle of unseen wildlife. At one point, I dared to speak. "Why are you doing this?" My voice wavered. He cocked his head, nostrils flaring, as though sniffing my fear and my wonder. The pattern repeated, 20 meters, stop, look. It was hypnotic, a rhythm older than memory. I thought the path would end. I imagined he would slip into the underbrush and vanish like a dream. But he did not. He sat down again on the road, turned to face me, and simply waited. I paused, chest tight. The sun had dipped lower, shadows stretching across the forest floor. I felt the pull of the cabin behind me, the promise of shelter and solitude. But I was rooted here by the gaze of a bear who was more than an animal in my mind. A false ending whispered through my thoughts, "He's done leading you. Go back to your life." I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heart hammering against ribs. I blinked, forced my legs to move. I raised my camera, intending to capture this astonishing behavior, but the moment I raised it, he sat up straighter and the world seemed to hush. I lowered the camera, realizing some things can't be reduced to pixels. He watched me, silent and patient, as if holding the world's breath in his massive chest. And I understood, with a sudden clarity, that he wasn't just guiding me along a forest path, he was guiding me toward something I'd buried long ago. He was waiting for me to follow. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. A shiver ran down my spine. I forced my fingers to tighten around the camera, knowing I wouldn't turn back. I took a step forward, and his eyes glowed with what felt like quiet triumph. He was calling me deeper into the unknown, and I had no choice but to obey. I didn't know why, but I followed him deeper into the taiga. He didn't bolt into the underbrush, he moved slowly, deliberately, as if leading a solemn procession. Each step he took pressed the soft moss beneath his paws, and I stepped where he had stepped, my boots squelching in his wake. We passed places I hadn't seen since childhood, the broken stump where my father taught me to carve my initials, the narrow game trail where deer used to gather at dawn, the fallen birch that marked the edge of a hidden clearing. Every landmark stirred a memory I'd long forgotten. But I couldn't tear my eyes from him. He paused now and then, ears twitching, nostrils quivering, listening to secrets I couldn't hear. Once he rose onto his hind legs, towering above the saplings, and scanned the horizon like a silent sentinel. Sunlight filtered through the needles, painting his fur gold. I felt as though I'd stumbled into an ancient rite, a journey I was meant to undertake. My heart thundered in my chest, half with fear, half with awe. I walked behind him as if he was someone who knew exactly where I needed to go. With every footfall, the forest seemed to lean in, watching. My breath hitched when he stopped again beside a knotted pine, eyes fixed forward. I thought he would simply vanish into the thicket. But he stopped again, and waited. I pressed my hand against the rough bark of a tree, vertigo spinning in my mind. The path ahead was shadowed, unknown. Yet I couldn't turn back. His quiet invitation held me in place, an unspoken promise that whatever lay ahead was meant to be revealed. I swallowed and took another step, following the bear deeper into the secret heart of the wilderness. When we broke through the last thicket, I saw the narrow path for the first time, an old game trail, overgrown so thick that no human had dared step here in decades. The bear padded ahead, pausing only to brush aside low-hanging branches, as if clearing the way for me. My heart pounded with equal parts dread and curiosity. We came to a fallen pine, its massive trunk split by rot. He circled it, ducking under a tangle of roots, and I followed in his silent wake. The path sloped upward toward a sheer rock face stained by age. I'd never known this hidden corner of the forest existed. Then I saw it, a smoldering ring of stones, half buried in pine needles, the charcoal cold and cracked. Ragged strips of fabric hung from nearby branches, faded cloth in mottled greens and browns. I stepped closer, knees trembling, and spotted bone, a small, bleached fragment, lodged against a stump like a grim token. My legs gave out. I sank to one knee, stomach twisting. Memories flashed, the missing hiker they'd searched for 3 years ago, the desperate airlift, the headlines that died down too quickly. My own son had vanished on a similar trail. Cold dread crept along my spine as I realized this was the place of death. 10 paces away, the bear settled onto his haunches, eyes fixed on me with somber patience. His great bulk sunk into the moss, and he exhaled a low, steady breath. It felt like an apology, and an accusation. He hadn't merely blocked my path, he had brought me here to bear witness. I closed my eyes, pressed fingers to my mouth to still the sob I felt rising. This is it, I thought. This is where the story ends. My chest tightened as the wind whispered through the pines. I pictured myself crawling back to the road, burning this terrible memory and forgetting everything I'd seen. But then I noticed, just beyond the fire ring, half hidden in the shadows, a glint of metal. Something small, almost swallowed by the earth. And in that moment, I realized this journey was far from over. I knelt beside the scattered bones, heart hammering, and my fingers brushed against something hard half buried in the moss. An old camera, its leather casing cracked, the screen spider-webbed with fractures. My hands shook so violently I could barely grip it. I pressed the power button, and the device whirred to life, flickering through frames. There they were, a handful of tourists, laughing and setting up camp by a stream. My breath caught when one of them stepped into view, a young man with my son's smile, the same crooked dimple beneath his left eye. My mind spun back to that frantic search 3 years ago, the helicopters, the bloodhounds, and then the silence when they never found him. I swallowed hard, realization crashing through me, this wasn't a random clearing. The bear had known. He had remembered where the boy lay lost. He wasn't guarding bones, he was guarding memory. He had led me here not by accident, but by purpose. I thought the bear must have stumbled upon the remains by chance, and only then sat watch. But he knew. He had been here all this time, preserving this sacred place in his silent vigil. And now I understood why he waited for me. I closed my eyes, and memories crashed through me like a torrent. I remembered the last time my son begged me to join him on a trek through these woods. I'd snapped at him, told him it was reckless, that I knew better, that forest was dangerous. I'd dismissed his passion for the wild as childish fantasy. How could I have been so blind? I looked up at the bear, who had risen and taken a few deliberate steps closer. His immense shoulders rippled beneath coarse fur, and he settled again just a few feet away, head held high. In his dark eyes I saw something impossible, not the raw hunger of a predator, but the weight of grief and the patience of time. He held knowledge I'd never possessed, and sorrow I'd never imagined. My chest clenched so tight I thought I might suffocate. I sank to my knees in the moss and tears spilled down my face. "I'm so sorry," I choked out. If only I'd listened to him, if only I hadn't pushed him away. My voice broke on each word. The bear remained still, his gaze unwavering. He did not retreat. He did not roar. He simply watched me with that quiet gravity. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand, voice trembling. "I was wrong," I whispered. "I didn't understand. I didn't believe." The old guilt I'd carried for years burned away in that confession, leaving raw regret in its place. As dusk slipped through the canopy, shadows lengthening around us, I thought he might stand and walk off into the undergrowth. I thought this moment of atonement might be enough, that he'd accept my apology and vanish. But he didn't. He stayed, sitting like a sentinel, watching me with inexhaustible patience until the sky beyond the trees turned the color of ash. And still, he waited. When dawn's pale light filtered through the pines, I woke to the rough earth beneath me and the hush of the forest. I'd fallen asleep curled among the scattered bones, exhaustion finally overtaking me. I sat up, muscles stiff, and saw, there was no bear. No shadow beside me. No massive shape slipping into the trees. Only the faint hiss of morning wind and the distant call of a jay. My hand tightened around the camera. I blinked, chest tightening as I lifted it to my face. The screen glowed, and there it was, a single image I had never taken. The jagged outline of a bear against a blood-red sunrise, giant head raised, nostrils flared to scent the world. In front of him stood a lone figure in a worn jacket, broad shoulders, lean frame, so achingly familiar I felt my throat constrict. It could have been my son. My breath caught. I held the camera at arm's length, heart pounding. Had I dreamed it? The forest held its breath with me as I stared at that impossible photograph. The bear's silhouette looked more alive than any ghost could be. And that figure, so small beneath his towering presence, seemed to tremble in the glow of the fading night. I thought it must have been a hallucination brought on by sweat and sorrow. I pressed my fingers to my eyes, shook my head, and lowered the camera. But when I looked again, the photo remained. Every pixel burned the same indelible truth: I had been here. I had seen this. And even now, with the bear vanished without a trace, I could still smell him, the wet musk of fur and earth, lingering on my clothes, in the dawn air. I pressed the camera to my chest, trembling, and whispered into the silent trees, "I know you were here. I know you waited for me." I thought it was just a dream. But the photograph was real. And the scent of the bear remained. When I climbed into the Land Cruiser, the engine turned over on the first try, as if the machine itself knew to carry me home. The road back seemed impossibly short, like I'd slipped through a hidden door in time and emerged only moments after I'd left. My heart was heavy with the silence of the forest's secrets. I told my story to anyone who'd listen, neighbors at the diner, the forest rangers at the station, but their eyes glazed over. They saw only the cracked screen of my camera, the absence of the photograph. "It must be your imagination," they said. "Stress and loneliness play tricks." No one believed me. No one saw what I saw. But I remember every detail. Every breath of pine-scented air. Every echo of those mighty paws on the earth. Every look in his ancient eyes. And every evening, as twilight drapes the trees in shadow, I stand at the edge of the woods and whisper into the dusk, "You knew. You waited for me. You showed me something I can never forget." He was not merely a wild beast. He was part of the life I lost, and somehow, he gave it back. A month later, I found myself retracing those familiar pines at dawn, my breath misting in the cold air. Where the bones and old fire ring lay, someone had erected a small wooden obelisk, rough-hewn planks, the name of my son carved clumsily, and a single gold-painted paw print. My heart slammed in my chest as I pressed my palm to the cool wood. I knelt, pulling the old laptop from my pack. It sprang to life unexpectedly, and there, on the screen, was that impossible image, my son's outline standing beside the bear's towering silhouette against a blood-red sunrise. I printed it on a scrap of paper and laid it at the base of the monument. My hands trembled as I straightened, tears stinging my eyes. I took a step deeper into the clearing, half expecting nothing more than empty air. But then, high on the granite face beyond the obelisk, I saw him. A dark shape rising against the pale sky, colossal and still. For a heartbeat, time froze. Our eyes met across the distance, two souls bound by grief and grace. The bear lifted his head, nostrils flaring, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as silently as he'd appeared, he turned and slipped behind the rock, vanishing into shadow. I sank to the snowy ground, tears streaming down my face, not from fear, but from the weight of truth settling in my bones. He had come back, one last time, to show me what I needed to see. I don't know who he was. But he knew what he was doing. He knew more than any human ever could. He showed me something that overturned my entire life. And if you're reading this, know that they remember. And they come back.